Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is away. He will be back on Wednesday. Here in his place once again is Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum. And Inez, we have so much to talk about today. We'll be talking about a Republican senator who needs a crash course on basic economics. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time Josh Hawley has veered off on basic capitalistic principles. We're also going to be talking a lot about the ICE protests going on in California. But Inez, we do need to start briefly on our conversation from last week, because one of the things we were excited about is that we hadn't seen mass, organized, chaotic, destructive left-wing protests in the streets. And it's almost like they heard that and said, oh, yeah, we forgot to do that already this year. It's almost like we jinxed it.
Yeah, I mean, I really got to take the L on this one. Here I was on the pod last week talking about, hey, like it's been kind of quiet recently. And lo and behold, we have not only violent, but like clearly organized violent riots in LA. So
we'll get to a lot of that in just a moment. In the meantime, let's talk about your business. If you own a business near where these rioters have been, it has certainly not been a good last few days. But in business, they say you can either have better, cheaper, or faster, but you can only pick two. But what if you can get all three at the same time? And that's exactly what businesses like Cohere, Thomson Reuters, and Specialized Bikes have, since they upgraded to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And right now, with zero commitment, you can try OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, for free by visiting oracle.com/martini. OCI is the blazing fast platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs, where you can run any workload in a high availability, consistently high performance environment and spend less than you would with other clouds. It's cheaper, it's faster, and it's better. And right now, with zero commitment, again, try OCI for free. That's oracle.com/martini. oracle.com/martini. One more time, oracle.com/martini. Well, as we've said, Inez, the lefties have been in the streets, the criminal illegals, the other illegals, their left-wing allies here in the United States, demanding an end to ICE raids. But guess who's not on their side in this? And that would be immigrants who are now citizens and voting. CNN's Harry Enton has been crunching the numbers. And after 4 years of Joe Biden, immigrant citizen voters have a very different view of which party is better on the issue of immigration. How about a 40-point swing in 4 years?
Start off on the fact that immigrant citizens, immigrant voters, foreign-born voters have gone tremendously to the right on this issue in 2024 and 2025 versus where they were in 2020. Closest to or trust more in immigration. You go back to 2020. Democrats, get this, held a 32-point lead on this issue. Immigrant voters were in the Democratic camp. Jump forward to 2024, 2025. Look at that shift, a 40-point shift to the right among immigrant voters. Republicans now lead on this issue by 8 points over Democrats, more so than any other group that I could find. The group of voters who became more hawkish on immigration were in fact immigrants themselves, immigrants who are registered to vote in this country.
Yeah, maybe because they did it the right way and they don't like to see people flooding in and causing chaos in their communities. But then there's the issue of how these same voters feel about illegal immigration and illegal immigrants. Big shift there, too. And Harry Enton unintentionally has a message for Karen Bass and a few others here at the end.
And this is where it all kind of comes together, Kate Baldwin. Look at this. The net favorable rating, immigrants who are here illegally, among immigrant citizens, again, those registered to vote. In 2020, look at this, plus 23 points on the net favorable rating. But look at where we were in 2024, minus 6 points, underwater. So immigrant citizens have become increasingly unfavorable in their views of those immigrants who are here illegally. So I think it's so important when we're talking about this debate from a political angle to separate those out who are undocumented immigrants versus those who are here legally and those who are citizens and those who are voters.
I'm glad to see the shift. I'm not exactly sure how you can be pro-illegal immigration, but the left manages to be there all the time. So, Inez, what do you make of this major shift and how it impacts what we're seeing right now?
To some extent, this has been around for a while, but you've seen these numbers shift really dramatically in the last 4 years because of the chaos and the policy caused by the last administration, right? There's always been somewhat of a divide. There have always been plenty of immigrants, my family included, who came to this country the right way, who are, we want this country to stay America, because the thing that we wanted to go to was America. My parents wanted me to grow up in a country like this one, not a country that's quote unquote fundamentally transformed, right? The way that Barack Obama talked about. So there's always been that part of the immigrant community. But I think you saw those dramatic numbers. And I wouldn't be surprised if actually other categories of voters, he mentions other categories of voters, this is the most, only because they were probably more positive before. I think you probably would see a big shift among all kinds of voters, whether they're, immigrants or not, whether they're moderate left to like super right wing. Probably everybody is more negative about it because simply the chaos was really, really clear, and it hit every location in America, right? It was no longer a problem in Hidalgo, Texas, and a problem that we were heaping on border states, on border communities only. We were getting these migrants shipped all over the country to big blue cities, to Martha's Vineyard, right? Remember that? And I think everybody just kind of collectively realized, like, this is not working. This is chaotic. This is bringing crime and disorder and just people who don't understand the norms of living in American society and have no interest in learning. So I just think overall the experiment that we've been conducting with having open borders for decades just got put on overdrive during the Biden administration. And all of a sudden, a lot of people who could conveniently ignore the problem when it was more confined to border states suddenly had the problem show up on their front doorstep. And I think that explains this shift among immigrants as much as it explains the shift among the American people on the subject.
Yeah, and the shift in the parties has been stark. I mean, you can find clips of Harry Reid back in the 90s, Bill Clinton back in the 90s, talking about how they need to crack down on illegal immigration. Jim and I just played a clip from Chuck Schumer in 2009 talking about how the American people refuse to accept illegal immigration and even the euphemisms of undocumented workers. And so think about how drastically that just the terminology and the positions on these issues have changed on the left over time. And now it's shifted over to whether we can get rid of criminals in this country illegally. I mean, if we can't even get to a consensus on this, and we are, I think we're getting closer to that, despite what the left wants to do here. But the fact that they're drawing their line in the sand here is really baffling, because they know it's got to be a massive loser for them, but they just can't help themselves. I found this story just the other day from Just the News. This is not LA, but this is Houston, where the latest ICE roundup included 142 individuals with a combined 473 convictions who illegally entered the U.S. a combined 480 times. We've got 8 documented gang members, 11 convicted child sex offenders, 22 human traffickers or smugglers, 3 convicted of child cruelty. We had aggravated assault, 43 of them, 48 for drug trafficking, on and on it goes. And so if we can't even agree on this, or the left thinks that they're going to score politically by standing up and resisting the effort to get criminals out of the country who should never have been here in the first place, I mean, I guess they're welcome to that if they want to get slaughtered, but it's just amazing that this is where this debate has shifted to.
What Donald Trump is doing right now is very popular. Not just, we just talked about the poll of immigrants, right? It's popular, as I said, it's popular with moderates. It's popular even with a lot of Democrats. The Trump administration is, by all, sort of logical common sense, they're starting with the worst of the worst. If you have a massive problem, if you have, millions of illegal aliens in the country, like, where do you start? Of course, you start with those, who have been convicted of other crimes. You start with those who have deportation orders, right? That's that due process that people are always complaining about, right? And I just want to highlight one of the legal issues here. When you have blue states like California, right, where the state police force and the state law enforcement are not cooperating with ICE, and that's what's so-called sanctuary city, right, or sanctuary state. By the way, I think they have the perfect constitutional power to do that. I think the 10th Amendment allows the states to direct the resources and the time of the officers that the state is paying for, right? We got California cops patrolling, like, let's say they pull somebody over, on the 101 in LA, right? They don't have to check papers if the state tells them not to do that, right? They don't have to even do that when they book somebody and they bring them in, or they take them to the courthouse to be arraigned. All of those points, though, are the cleanest, the easiest, the most orderly way that doesn't involve like an entire community for ICE to go ahead and pick up people for whom there are deportation orders, okay? So if the state refuses to do that, ICE has to go out into the community. And then usually when they find one person that they're looking for that has, for example, a long criminal history, a deportation order, who's been kicked out of the country 4 times and is back, right? They're starting by prioritizing those people. But when they go out and they try to find that guy, usually he's living with a family, or he's, living with around his friends, or he's hanging out with his buddies. And lo and behold, all of those people are here illegally too. And ICE is going to go ahead and arrest those people as well. So that's what you see in California. And that's what's allegedly sparking these protests, is because ICE is having to go out in the communities. Why are they out there in the communities rounding people up? Because the California cops aren't calling them at the police station when they have somebody who just got, clipped for drunk driving and he doesn't have legal papers to be in the United States. The state is not cooperating. So they have to do this on their own, right? So all of this chaos is actually created by the sanctuary state policies. And I want to underline that because I think it's something that's getting missed in a lot of this.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. They're making this so much harder. And they want to be martyrs in this cause, too, because Tom Homan has said, like you said, you don't have to help us, but you should not be in our way. You do not want to get in our way. And so just like Ras Baraka at the ICE detention facility in New Jersey, trying to make himself out to be a martyr, I don't think it's going to pay off for him in the New Jersey gubernatorial primary. Gavin Newsom is begging. He's desperately wants Trump to arrest him after those
You see him
comments
on TV saying, come and arrest me, come and arrest me. Man, he is such an actor. I'm sorry.
Right.
What are they going to arrest you for, Gavin?
Oh, yeah, he was...
you spent too much money in a French Laundry?
Yeah, I mean, he tried to pretend to be a moderate for about 2 minutes with that podcast, and now his true colors are shining through again. So he'll be very disappointed if Trump doesn't have him arrested, which would probably be the smarter move, honestly. All right, Inez, well, it's gratifying to see that a strong section of the American electorate, including among those who came to this country, did things the right way, are seeing things through the lens of common sense. We have a lack of common sense in much of our country now, and we need a resurgence of it. And a great place to find it is at Hillsdale College. We'll be talking about economics a little bit later in the conversation and how one Republican senator is struggling in some basic areas of economics. So maybe he needs the class Understanding Capitalism, the free online course now available to all of us from Hillsdale College. Hillsdale offers more than 40 free online courses. That's right, they're free. You can learn about the Constitution, the stories in the book of Genesis, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, the ancient Christian church, and much more. In these 7 lectures about understanding capitalism, you'll learn why capitalism depends on private property rights, the rule of law, and above all, freedom, and why capitalism is ultimately a system that encourages, not undermines, encourages morality. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll in this course, Understanding Capitalism. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll for free. All right, Inez, kind of getting back to what we were joking about in the beginning, and that's that we hadn't seen a lot of organized, destructive left-wing protests as of last week, but we obviously did starting on Friday, and it continued through the last few days here in the Los Angeles area. And as Jim pointed out, the LAPD took 2 hours to respond to the federal building, which was 0.3 miles away on Friday. The LAPD has obviously gotten a lot more serious in the last couple of days, definitely calming things down, it seemed. Last night, taking that more seriously. I guess that's Newsom trying to prove that the National Guard wasn't needed, but if the LAPD had done that from the beginning, then he probably would have been right, but he didn't want to do that then. Anyway, last night, we kept seeing these tweets about how organizers were providing things for the demonstrators. So one reporter who's also affiliated with the Claremont Institute, I know you've got some affiliation there too, says organizers of LA protests are now assembling and handing out American flags to protesters. This comes after days of footage showing them waving Mexican flags while torching cars, attacking police, and burning U.S. flags. It's clear they realized the current optics were a disaster. There was also a couple of tweets out saying that protesters were basically given face shields. I don't know if that was to prevent pepper spray or whatever in case things got out of hand. So clearly somebody's bankrolling this. Now we've got a bunch of protests scheduled for this weekend to coincide and distract from Trump's military parade on Saturday. And so somebody's obviously footing the bill, or many people are footing the bill. So how does this get organized so quickly?
Yeah, there are definitely some groups helping them organize, and especially when you see like standardized stuff so quickly. Of course, like, yes, but make sure that you take the Mexican flags away and give them American flags to wave, right? That's obviously coming from the top. I do want to make a note about the Mexican flags, and because I think this is something that people not from California and not from the Southwest are a lot less familiar with. I realized on Twitter the other day when people were responding to me like, why don't they just go back to Mexico, right? Why, if they're flying the Mexican flag and they want to be, under the flag of Mexico, why are they fighting this? Why don't they go back to Mexico? There is a pretty popular ideological movement called La Raza, or the Reconquista, right? So the idea is very similar to the other anti-colonial leftist philosophies, right? And it's that essentially the Mexican-American War was a colonialist war, that we need to give California and large parts of the Southwest back to Mexico, that they belong to Mexico, and in fact, California is Mexico and ought to be Mexico. That's part of the reason. And this is not like, esoteric or difficult to find. You can find it on every college campus, and then among certain, especially certain gangs. It is an ideology. I would say it's a small minority of people who believe this, but it's clearly outsized among these protesters. And a lot of the people that you see waving Mexican flags, that's what they believe. They believe that the border crossed them. That's what they say. We didn't cross the border crossed us, right? This is our land. This is Mexican land, and it shouldn't belong to the United States, which is a racist colonialist enterprise, right? Very similar to what we hear about Israel and Gaza, very similar to the land acknowledgments that we've been hearing for so long. America is a, evil colonialist empire founded on racism and genocide. Same piece of ideology, except this is like the explicitly sort of like Mexican supremacist kind of wing of it. La Raza means the race, which is not a really great translation. I always kind of push back against the right for using that, because it's more like the people, or like, my tribe, right? In any case, this is something that's quite popular, and I suspect a lot of the people waving the flags, that's what their ideology is. But this is violent and organized. There have people firing fireworks and throwing like big rocks off the overpasses and stuff at cars, at law enforcement. I mean, it is getting quite dangerous for law enforcement to carry out what they need to do. And so, yeah, this is not a joke. And it was certainly not under control. They're really running the same mostly peaceful playbook from 2020. And I think it's going to go over very, very differently.
And just as an exit here, Inez had a great tweet over the weekend saying, with all these people screaming about ICE raids, which are perfectly legal, of course, she says, I want every single person against this to say on the record, they do not wish our immigration laws to be enforced ever. Let's get clarity. And there were a surprising number of people basically saying, yeah, that's exactly what we want, which tells you where the left is.
Yeah, it's not just the left. I mean, it's libertarians. It's the Cato Institute type folks, some of whom are my friends. Like, I'm not sort of personally attacking anybody, but let's be clear. I value, I think as Dennis Prager always says, I value clarity over agreement. They don't want these laws enforced. If you're not going to support ICE going out and arresting some of the worst, is what we talked about in this segment, right? Like, you're talking about lists of people who either have deportation orders or they have a list of heinous crimes they've been convicted of. Like, this, you're starting with the worst people, right? Maybe we can have this discussion again after we deport 10 million people and you're really gotten down to people who did just cross the border illegally but have been here for 20 years and have been otherwise law-abiding. Okay, I understand that's a different conversation than the one we're having. But if you're even going to object to ICE going out and enforcing the law in these instances, I just be honest. You don't want to deport anyone. You don't want our immigration laws enforced. It's very clear. And so when we get to these discussions about what to do with these edge cases, or, what kind of process is due to these people and how should the process proceed in terms of deporting people, I just think it's an important threshold question. Do you want to enforce the law at all or not? Because it seems like you don't, and all your other objections are flowing from the fact that you just don't want the law to be enforced.
Well, as you just said, Inez, clarity is critical when we're talking about where we stand on various issues or what's happening in our own lives. This is an ad by BetterHelp. Maybe you just need more help than talking with those who are normally around you. And that's where BetterHelp can come in. Men, for example, today facing immense pressure to perform, to provide, keep it all together. Talk it out. Figure out how to chart that path forward where you can be successful. And BetterHelp has more than 35,000 therapists. It's the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people around the world. It's got an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 based on more than 1.7 million client reviews. It's convenient. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life, and you can switch therapists at any time. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/3ML. That's BetterHelp.com/3ML. All right, Inez, on to our crazy martini now. And on a lot of different issues, grilling left-wing witnesses, judicial picks, that sort of thing, and other issues, cultural issues. Josh Hawley, Republican senator from Missouri, is a very strong conservative. But he's got some interesting ticks when it comes to economics, which are very frustrating. CBS News with the latest one here. Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley plans to introduce legislation Tuesday to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 per hour, a position that aligns one of the most conservative Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill with some of the most liberal members of Congress. The legislation, called the Higher Wages for American Workers Act, would raise the federal standard starting in 2026 and would also call for an increase in subsequent years to match inflation. Vermont Democratic Senator Peter Welch has signed on as a co-sponsor. That's never a good sign either. Quote, for decades, this is Hawley, working Americans have seen their wages flatline. One major culprit of this is the failure of the federal minimum wage to keep up with the economic reality facing hardworking Americans every day. This bipartisan legislation would ensure that workers across America benefit from higher wages. And he talks about how cost of living has obviously gone up quite a bit in the last few years here. But this is not the first area where Hawley has diverted from normal, basic capitalistic economics. He's also a fan of the PRO Act. PRO Act is modeled on a California law which would basically gut the gig economy by requiring employers to provide full benefits to anyone who does work for them, which obviously would mean they can hire far fewer people in the gig economy type style of work. So Inez, curious head scratchers here on both of these issues.
I definitely think the PRO Act is a terrible one. Like it's overkill. I understand where Josh Hawley is coming from, or even some of the leftist colleagues are coming from when they talk about the rise of gig work. I think there were some advantages to kind of the 50s style economy where people were working mostly for one employer their whole lives. It's obviously not the economy we live in. And I do think there are genuine cases where gig workers are being functionally exploited, and it's kind of the business model that's built in. I mean, and I do think this wraps into the immigration issue quite a lot, right? Because some of the more quintessential cases that I can think of and the problems with gig work, right, are things like DoorDash or Uber, where oftentimes it's not even the same person who is on the card. It's somebody has bought essentially a profile to work as a gig worker for one of these companies, and they are making very little money, and it seems like a sort of exploitative and sort of un-American in a weird way sort of arrangement. That being said, I think the PRO Act goes way, way too far. It is basically preventing people from contracting on a non-employer basis. And that's going to kill a lot of really, really productive work. And also, like, just, from the female perspective, especially I work for an organization, that has all working from home. I'm a full-time employee, but like we also have fellows. I mean, it's just, this is a situation that works really, really well for women who are trying to balance home and work obligations. And I think when you take people's flexibility away in that sense. So I think Josh Hawley is going too far on some of these things. I do think sometimes he asks questions that are worth asking, like, is it always the best option? Let's for the sake of argument, let's just say like capitalism and completely unfettered free market is probably the best thing for the GDP, right? It makes the GDP go up. It creates more wealth because people are making the optimal decisions in terms of how they're allocating their money and so on. I think it is worth asking questions like, okay, so yes, we want a free market economy overall, but are we willing to curtail those profits? And I mean for workers and for I'm not talking about like fat cat profits or whatever, but are we willing to sacrifice some of that for a little more cultural cohesion, for a situation in which a lot more families don't feel that they have to have two earners, right, to try to move back away from the two-income trap, where we have fewer sort of gig opportunities and more perhaps lesser paid, but like more sort of solid, large companies that are employing people for a long time. I mean, I think those are questions that shouldn't be forbidden on the right to ask. I mean, economics is a good, it's not the only good. So, I mean, I generally find this wing of the party, I find them interesting. I'm not like fully convinced. I'm certainly not convinced on the PRO Act. It just seems like way too heavy-handed for me. But I do appreciate people like Orrin Cass asking, does the economy work for us as a nation, as families, or are we like essentially cogs in an economic or zone, the way that the EU is? And I think those are questions worth asking.
I don't mind the questions being asked. And I think it's good to have a robust debate in your own party because it sharpens your arguments when you're debating the other party. But when you're artificially inflating wages compared to the value that the worker is providing, then the employer is going to be in a position where, yes, I have to pay you that, but I can only hire fewer of you because of that. And so it becomes a money game. And when you look at the minimum wage out in California, and fast food workers up to $20 an hour, except for Panera.
I guess my question is how much is this even a problem? Because it seems to me, and maybe this is like a New York thing, but I've lived in other places, and it's been a really long time since I saw a job, like an entry-level job advertised for under like something close to 15. Like even in, McDonald's, the sort of typical like lowest level work, I like McDonald's near me advertises for 15 an hour. I was in Charlottesville recently. There's like this amazing bagel shop. Shout out to Bodo's. I think you start at like 14 and it goes up to 17 an hour. That's a smaller Virginia town. Maybe there are a lot of employers paying massively under 15, but I kind of think inflation has caught up.
It may have, which is why the Democrats are now pushing 20, 25, or when Barbara Lee was running for Senate, she wanted a $50 an hour minimum wage. But if you go into McDonald's,
right.
When I go in there, you're either
It's
ordering
automated.
at a kiosk or you're
Yep.
waiting a long time for somebody to come to the counter. They don't have as many employees because they can't afford to pay as many that wage. So, but they also are jacking up the food prices. I mean, you take a family of four through a McDonald's drive-through, you're north of $30 now. I mean, a few years ago, it was probably about half that.
I don't know that the minimum wage hike, even to 15, but like even before that existed, right? We're seeing the inflation in food costs everywhere. Like that's the reason that McDonald's, the primary reason that there's been such an increase. I agree with you about the automation. Like I do think people will just automate, but I think that's going to happen, right? I think that's probably happening regardless. And it's a combination of economic sense and also just the quality of customer service and interactions. And this is something that people have been complaining about since COVID, right? That people don't want to be there. They don't want, you don't get the kind of service that you did even in 2018, 2019. And a lot of people now the customers prefer to interact with the machine because at least, the order gets put in.
Yeah, I went through the drive-thru the other day and they got it wrong. So yeah, and the left and others, I guess Hawley would be one of them. I think one of the arguments is that most minimum wage jobs are not meant to be careers. It's kind of a teenage job and other things, so you're not meant to bankroll a whole family based on a minimum wage job. Some people may be forced to do that at various times, but in the end, it's a stepping stone to better work. So anyway, and as always, great to have you with us. We always appreciate you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum, and for Jim Garrity today, I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us. We thank you for listening, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow all three of us on X. Inez is at Inez Felcher. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Columbus. Have a great Tuesday. Join us again Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.